Greetings. I'm sorry, I'm all ready to start, but I see that I have a VIP who just arrived. Please give me a moment just so I can say hello. Hello, Governor. By the look on your face, I can guess who just got back today. It's got to be Don Pedro of Aragon, that young Florentine Claudio, and Benedict of Padua, them wild-eyed boys who have been away at the wars. And even though they've reconciled, I imagine things haven't changed much between Don Pedro and his brother Don John either. I doubt he had much to say since he proclaims he's not of many words. And the way that Benedict and Beatrice constantly bicker with one another and deny their obvious attractions, I still think them cats are crazy. I also heard that Don Pedro and Claudio were asking if you were around and wondering where you can be found. I'm sure it has something to do with your daughter Hero. I told them you were going to be at the Mass this evening, and I have a feeling that since Hero, Ursula, and Margaret like to dance a lot, they'll be driving all the old men crazy. And that wildcat niece of yours, Beatrice, the way she talks to Benedict is no wonder he calls her Lady Tongue. When they last met, Benedict was taunting her, but she seemed completely unfazed by his attempts to rattle her. And although she was cool as a cucumber in front of her cousin and the others, I could tell that inside she was red hot. I mean, she was steaming. And I wouldn't be surprised one bit if this chick got up, spoke poniards, and slapped Benedict's face. Man, if that chick don't want to know how badly he's in love with her and realize that she loves him too, I say forget her. But enough about that. Spread the word around to all Messina. I'm sure the Mass will be a big success. I have a feeling that on that night they'll be dressed to kill. Alert the watch that if drink will flow, it's possible that blood will spill. And if the watch encounters any boys who want to fight, you better let them, especially if they're none of the prince's subjects. And as a personal request, I'd love to hear that lute box player who sits in the corner blasting out my favorite song, you know the one, Hey Nani Nani. Let's face it, it's been a long time since a hot January, and the nights are longer and won't be long. No, it won't be long at all till summer comes, now that the boys are here again. So good Signor Leonato, spread the word around and let everyone know that the boys are back in town again and that they're hanging out at Messina. In the 1989 movie When Harry Met Sally, Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan eventually fall in love, but they start out seemingly being completely incompatible with one another. But just as in that movie and every recent romantic comedy, especially all the ones that are now made for television, you'll see that they're using the same concept of opposites do attract. This makes for great comedic love stories, and if you want to know where most of these writers got their inspiration from, look no further than William Shakespeare's characters Benedict and Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. So let's take a look at the plot. In Messina, a messenger arrives bringing news that Don Pedro, Prince of Aragon, will return that night from a successful battle along with the noble lords Claudio and Benedict. Beatrice asks the messenger about Benedict and mocks Benedict's ineffectiveness as a soldier. Leonato explains there is a kind of merry war betwixt Senior Benedict and her. When the soldiers arrive, Don Pedro tells Leonato that he and his men will stay at least a month, and Benedict and Beatrice resume their verbal sparring. Don Pedro's illegitimate brother, Don John, is also introduced to Leonato. He's a man of few words, but capable of many villainous schemes. Meanwhile, Claudio's feelings for Hero are rekindled, and he tells Benedict that he wants to woo her. Benedict, a confirmed bachelor who openly despises marriage, tries to talk him out of it. Conversely, Don Pedro encourages Claudio's pursuit. Benedict swears that he will never marry. Don Pedro laughs at him and tells him he will change his tune when he finds the right person. At the evening's masked ball, a disguised Don Pedro woos Hero on Claudio's behalf, but Don John uses this opportunity to stir up chaos by telling Claudio that Don Pedro is wooing Hero for himself. Claudio begins to doubt Don Pedro's motives, but the misunderstanding is quickly resolved and Claudio wins Hero's hand in marriage. Meanwhile, Benedict and Beatrice dance together, trading disparaging remarks under the cover of their masks. Benedict is stung at hearing himself described as the prince's jester, a very dull fool, and longs to be spared the company of his lady tongue. Since Don Pedro and his men have a week before Claudio and Hero's wedding, they concoct a matchmaking plan for Benedict and Beatrice. They arrange to have Benedict overhear a conversation in which Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonato proclaim that Beatrice is madly in love with Benedict, but that she is too afraid to tell him. Similarly, Hero and Ursula arrange for Beatrice to overhear their conversation in which they discuss Benedict's undying love for Beatrice. Both Benedict and Beatrice are delighted when they think that they are the object of unrequited love, and both resolve to mend their faults and declare their love to one another. Meanwhile, Don John plans a scheme to stop the wedding by embarrassing his brother and wreaking misery on both Leonato and Claudio. He tells Don Pedro and Claudio that Hero is disloyal, that is, unfaithful to Claudio. He arranges for them to see his follower Borachio locked in an amorous and sensual embrace with Hero in her bedchamber, when it is actually Hero's chambermaid, Margaret. Claudio and Don Pedro are taken in, and Claudio vows to humiliate Hero publicly. At the wedding the next day, Claudio denounces Hero before all of the stunned guests. Hero faints as Claudio walks out with Don Pedro and Don John. A humiliated Leonato is furious with his daughter. However, the presiding friar intervenes and believes that Hero is innocent. He suggests that because of the shameful accusations, the family should fake Hero's death and fill Claudio with remorse. This, of course, is known as the dead trick. In the heat of the moment, Benedict and Beatrice confess their love to one another. Beatrice then asks Benedict to kill Claudio as proof of his unfailing love and devotion to her. Benedict hesitates, but eventually he agrees. Leonato and Antonio blame Claudio for Hero's supposed death and threaten him, but he avoids their confrontation. An incensed Benedict arrives and challenges Claudio to a duel. On the night of Don John's treachery, the local watch overhears Borachio bragging to Conrad about his treason, and the watch arrests them. Despite their ineptitude, and headed by Constable Dogberry, they obtain their confession and inform Leonato of Hero's innocence. Meanwhile, Don John flees Messina, and armed men are sent to capture him. Remorseful and still believing Hero is dead, Claudio agrees to her father's demand that he marry Antonio's daughter, who is said to be almost a copy of his child that's dead. The next day, at the wedding ceremony, as Claudio is about to marry his other bride, she unveils her face and reveals that she is actually Hero. Claudio is overjoyed. Beatrice and Benedict publicly confess that they do love each other and agree to marry. Don Pedro taunts Benedict, the self-proclaimed confirmed bachelor, for now being a married man. Benedict counters that he finds the prince sad and advises him, "Get thee a wife, get thee a wife." As the play draws to a close, a messenger arrives with news that Don John has been captured, but Benedict advises Don Pedro to postpone Don John's punishment until the next day so that the couples can enjoy their newfound happiness. The happy couples dance and celebrate as the play ends. When we return, we'll look at some of the marvelous characters in Much Ado About Nothing. We're just going to look at a few of the characters in Much Ado About Nothing. Don Pedro is the Prince of Aragon, who has just defeated his half-brother in a military engagement and is returning to Messina, the capital of Sicily. Don John is the illegitimate half-brother to Don Pedro, who is melancholy by nature and is a natural-born troublemaker. The two brothers have recently reconciled, although Don John is not done creating mischief and treachery. Claudio of Florence is a young lord and military companion of Don Pedro. In fact, he's a count. He's also very much in love with Hero. Leonato is the governor of Messina, who welcomes Don Pedro and his associates during their break in their military exploits. Beatrice is the sharp-tongued orphan niece of Leonato and cousin of Hero, who loves to engage in witty verbal battles with Benedick. And Benedick of Padua is another military companion of Don Pedro and a confirmed bachelor who seems to take great joy in his verbal sparrings with Beatrice. It's clear that the two of them have been involved in the past, most likely in a romantic way. And finally, Constable Dogberry is in charge of the watch along with his sidekick Verges. Dogberry is perhaps Shakespeare's most comedic law enforcement creation, who continuously uses malapropisms, that is, incorrect words that sound like the right ones that he means. We'll also see this in Measure for Measure with Constable Elbow, and to a much less degree, Constable Anthony Dull in Love's Labour's Lost. When we get back, we'll look at some plot devices and memorable scenes from Much Ado About Nothing. Let's look at some of the major plot devices and memorable scenes in Much Ado About Nothing. Just like in Twelfth Night, Romeo and Juliet, Troilus and Cressida, Othello, Love's Labour's Lost, and Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, we see characters eavesdropping on other people's conversations, which is always a great plot device and great fun for us, the audience, especially if we know it's going to happen and that they're going to get the stories wrong. Shakespeare understood that watching a couple bicker back and forth was a sure sign that they were destined to fall in love. This was an excellent plot device to include for the secondary love story, besides Claudio and Hero, and it leads to one of the most memorable scenes in the play, which takes place in Act 1, Scene 1, when Beatrice first addresses Benedick. She says, "I wonder that you will still be talking, Signor Benedick. Nobody marks you." "What, my dear Lady Disdain, are you yet living? Is it possible Disdain should die while she hath such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedick? Courtesy itself must convert to disdain if you come in her presence. Then is courtesy a turncoat, but it is certain I am loved of all ladies, only you excepted, and I would I could find in my heart that I had not a hard heart, for truly I love none. A dear happiness to women, they would else have been troubled with a pernicious suitor. I thank God in my cold blood I am of your humor for that. I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me. God keep your ladyship still in that mind, so some gentleman or other shall scape a predestinate scratched face. Scratching could not make it worse, and 'twere such a face as yours were. Well, you are a rare parrot teacher. A bird of my tongue is better than a beast of yours. I would my horse had the speed of your tongue, and so good a continuer, but keep in your way, in God's name I have done. And Beatrice says, you always end with a jade's trick. I know you of old, which lets us know that this couple has had some history in the past that didn't end well. I want to talk about the character Constable Dogberry because in Shakespeare's time, there was an expression that went, dim as a constable. In Shakespeare's day, there was no standing police force, so that towns would appoint someone to be the constable, but it was a job that nobody really wanted. It didn't pay very well. Your major responsibility was squealing on all your neighbors so they hated you, and the job usually went to the most pathetic person they could find. Shakespeare decided to use this familiarity as a plot device, and to make it even more humorous, he decided to have Constable Dogberry using the wrong words whenever he's trying to make his points. One of the most memorable scenes in the play is when Don Pedro stops him and asks why he detained two of his brother's men. Listen to this exchange. Marry, sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanderers. Sixth and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things. And to conclude, they are lying knaves. Don Pedro responds in kind, saying, First, I ask thee what they have done. Thirdly, I ask thee, what's their offense? Sixth and lastly, why they are committed, and to conclude, what you lay to their charge. Finally, Don Pedro concludes, this learned constable is too cunning to be understood. When we get back, we'll look at some of the major themes of Much Ado About Nothing. In this play, we see several instances of jealousy and revenge. It's obvious from the way Don John speaks that even though he's now reconciled to his brother, he's still jealous of him. He says to Conrad, I cannot hide what I am. I must be sad when I have cause and smile at no man's jest. Eat when I have stomach and wait on no man's leisure. Sleep when I am drowsy and tend on no man's business. Laugh when I am merry and claw no man in his humor. Conrad tries to reason with him. Yea, you must not make the full show of this till you may do it without controlment. You have of late stood out against your brother, and he hath taken you newly into his grace. Where it is impossible you should take true root, but by the fair weather that you make yourself. It is needful that you frame the season for your own harvest. Don John replies, I had rather be a canker in a hedge than a rose in his grace, and it better fits my blood to be disdained of all than to fashion a carriage to rob love from any. In this, though I cannot be said to be a flattering, honest man, it must not be denied that I am a plain-dealing villain. I am trusted with a muzzle and enfranchised with a clog. Therefore I have decreed not to sing in my cage. If I had my mouth, I would bite. If I had my liberty, I would do my liking. In the meantime, let me be that I am, and seek not to alter me. Of course, Claudio becomes jealous of Don Pedro when Don John convinces him that he is wooing Hero for himself. But we know that this is just another one of Don John's attempts to cause mischief. As he also says in Act 1, Scene 3 of Claudio, if I can cross him any way, I bless myself every way. As for revenge, it's also prevalent throughout the entire play. Beatrice wants revenge on Claudio for slandering her cousin and ruining Hero's wedding day, not to mention her reputation and her good name. Benedict seeks revenge on Claudio to defend Hero's honor and keep his pledge to Beatrice. Leonato and Antonio want revenge on both Claudio and Don Pedro for killing Hero, even though she's not really dead. And finally, Don Pedro wants revenge on his brother for creating this uproar in the first place. But fortunately, the much happier and soon-to-be married Benedict advises him to think not on it till the next day so that they may enjoy their wedding celebrations. There's many themes that run through Much Ado About Nothing, but certainly loyalty, honor, and virtue are worth mentioning. Benedict respectfully says to Don Pedro, My lord, for your many courtesies, I thank you. I must discontinue your company. This is because he must challenge Claudio in order to keep his promise to Beatrice. Even though Conrad and Braccio are now technically part of Don Pedro's company, they are still loyal to Don John and say they will assist him to the death. To Leonato, Antonio, Claudio, Don Pedro, Beatrice, and especially Hero, honor is everything, so that the thought of Hero being a common stale would almost be like killing her. She would have no redeeming value or worth to any prospective suitor, and she would bring shame upon her family. This brings us to the theme of virtue. In Shakespeare's day, and as it should still be today, a woman's virtue was her most prized possession, especially if she wished to marry well. And Shakespeare goes out of his way to point out three of his lady's virtues. First, we have Beatrice. Leonato says, Well then, go you into hell? Beatrice replies, No, but to the gate, and there will the devil meet me, like an old cuckold with horns on his head, and say, Get you to heaven, Beatrice, get you to heaven. Here's no place for you maids. If you didn't know, a maid is a virgin. Next we have Leonato talking to Braccio. This naughty man shall face to face be brought to Margaret, who I believe was packed in all this wrong, hired to it by your brother. Borachio says, No, by my soul she was not, nor knew not what she did when she spoke to me, but always hath been just and virtuous in anything that I do know of her. And finally, when Hero is revealed to be alive and ready to marry Count Claudio, she reassures him of her virtue, saying, And when I lived, I was your other wife. And then she unmasks at the wedding. And when you loved, you were my other husband. One Hero died defiled, but I do live, and surely, as I live, I am a maid. Finally, Leonato says, She died, my lord, but whiles her slander lived. When we return, we'll look at some of the most famous lines in Much Ado About Nothing. One of the reasons that Much Ado About Nothing succeeds so beautifully is because it is infused with powerful lines throughout the entire play. Beatrice has some wonderful lines when Hero and Claudio realize that they're in love. First, she tells Claudio, Speak, Count, 'tis your cue. Remember, she's talking to an actor on stage. Next, she follows up saying to Hero, Speak, cousin, or if you cannot, stop his mouth with a kiss, and let him not speak neither. And finally, she observes, My cousin tells him in his ear that he is in her heart. We also have a great speech in Act 2, Scene 3, when Benedict is contemplating whether or not he would ever get married. He says, May I be so converted and see with these eyes? I cannot tell. I think not. I will not be sworn, but love may transform me to an oyster. But I'll take my oath on it. Till he hath made an oyster of me, he shall never make me such a fool. One woman is fair, yet I am well. Another is wise, yet I am well. Another virtuous, yet I am well. But till all graces be in one woman shall not come in my grace. Rich she shall be, that's certain. Wise, or I'll none. Virtuous, or I'll never cheapen her. Fair, or I'll never look on her. Mild, or come not near me. Noble, or not I for an angel. Of good discourse, an excellent musician, and her hair shall be of what color please God. I highly recommend that you watch the 1993 Kenneth Branagh version of Much Ado About Nothing, in which Patrick Doyle, who has a bit part as Balthazar, sings his own magnificent arrangement of Sigh No More Ladies. And while I won't sing it for you, I am happy to share the great lyrics with you. Sigh no more, ladies, sigh no more. Men were deceivers ever. One foot in sea and one on shore. To one thing constant never. Then sigh not so, but let them go. And be you blithe and bonny, converting all your sounds of woe into hey, nonny, nonny. Sing no more ditties, sing no more, of dumps so dull and heavy. The fraud of men was ever so, since summer first was leafy. Then sigh not so, but let them go. And be you blithe and bonny, converting all your sounds of woe into hey, nonny, nonny. When we get back, we'll look at some of the major turning points and correlations in Much Ado About Nothing. Let's look at three key turning points in Much Ado About Nothing. First, Benedict and Beatrice finally realize that the two of them love each other. You can see a complete shift in their behavior towards one another after this point, and it sets them up to be teased by their friends. In Act 2, Scene 3, Benedict has a speech as he muses about being in love. This is after he overhears his friends saying that Beatrice is in love with him. This could be no trick. The conference was sadly born. They have the truth of this from Hero. They seem to pity the lady. It seems her affections have their full bent. Love me? Why, it must be requited. I hear how I am censured. They say I will bear myself proudly, if I perceive the love come from her. They say, too, that she will rather die than give any sign of affection. I did never think to marry. I must not seem proud. Happy are they that hear their detractions and can put them to mending. They say the lady is fair, 'tis a truth. I can bear them witness, and virtuous, 'tis so. I cannot reprove it, and wise, but for loving me. By my troth, it is no addition to her wit, nor no great argument of her folly, for I will be horribly in love with her. I may chance have some odd quirks and remnants of wit broken on me, because I have railed so long against marriage. But doth not the appetite alter? A man loves the meat in his youth that he cannot endure in his age. Shall quips and sentences of these paper bullets of the brain awe a man from the career of his humor? No, the world must be peopled. When I said that I would die a bachelor, I did not think that I would live till I were married. Here comes Beatrice. By this day she's a fair lady. I do spy some marks of love in her. Next, after Benedict challenges Claudio to demonstrate his loyalty to Beatrice and to avenge his honor, we see him shift his loyalties from his military brothers to his newly established love interest. Had this not been a comedy, this turning point could have easily resulted in this play being a tragedy. And third, the truth is discovered about the plot to shame Hero, and the wedding goes forward. As you look at this play, step by step, it's easy to see that Shakespeare was in complete control of where he wanted his characters and his audience to go from start to finish, and that's what makes Much Ado About Nothing such a comedic masterpiece. As for correlations, they are numerous in this play. Hero is falsely accused of infidelity, just like Mariana in Measure for Measure, Desdemona in Othello, Hermione in The Winter's Tale, and Catherine of Aragon in Henry VIII. Benedict and Beatrice have a strained past love history, just like Biron and Rosaline in Love's Labour's Lost. They also fight like cats and dogs at first, just like Catherine and Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew. Constable Dogberry is very similar to Elbow in Measure for Measure, and both are constantly using malapropisms. Hero is unveiled at the end to the joy of Claudio, and they are reconciled and reunited like Leontes and Hermione in The Winter's Tale, Pericles and Thaisa in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Aegeon and Emilia in A Comedy of Errors. Uncharacteristically, however, of Shakespeare's plays, Leonato gives his parental consent to the young lovers, unlike the fathers in Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Merchant of Venice, The Merry Wives of Windsor, The Winter's Tale, and Othello. I guess sometimes you just have to change up those tried and true plot devices. In doing some research for this episode, I found some interesting facts about Much Ado About Nothing. In Shakespeare's time, the word nothing would be pronounced the same as noting. So the title, Much Ado About Nothing, is actually a double entendre, wherein the characters are constantly noting things about each other. While the play takes place in Messina, Italy, which is the capital of Sicily, Don Pedro is the Prince of Aragon, so he originates from Spain, and although it doesn't specifically say so in the play, according to the second edition of the Complete Works of William Shakespeare, at the beginning of the play, Don Pedro is returning from a recent military engagement in which he has just defeated his half-brother Don John. Shakespeare picked his characters' names very carefully. Beatrice means one who blesses, and Benedict means one who is blessed. In the 1600s, a constable was a position that didn't pay very well, so it usually was occupied by somebody who was a little dim. Shakespeare made the most of this by creating Constable Dull in Love's Labour's Lost, Elbow in Measure for Measure, and Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing. But with Dogberry, Shakespeare used this character to demonstrate some of his finest humor in any of his comedies by his constant malapropisms, that is, using a similar word for the correct word. Examples like comprehend instead of apprehend, suspect instead of respect, and, "O villain, thou wilt be condemned to everlasting redemption for this," instead of everlasting damnation. And of course, who could forget his misunderstanding of the word tedious when the impatient Leonato says, "Neighbors, you are tedious." Dogberry actually thinks this is a compliment and replies, "It pleases your worship to say so, but we are the poor Duke's officers. But truly, in mine own part, if I were as tedious as a king, I could find it in my heart to bestow all of it on your worship." By the way, the role of Dogberry was originally played by Will Kemp, the same actor who had previously played Bottom and literally gets turned into an ass in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So when Dogberry says, "Masters, remember that I am an ass," Shakespeare's audience would no doubt make the connection. When we return, we'll look at some of the great actors in the 1984 BBC Shakespeare version of this play. Let's take a look at some of the actors who performed in the 1984 BBC Shakespeare version of Much Ado About Nothing. John Finch, who plays Don Pedro, also plays the recurring role of Henry Bolingbroke in Richard II in 1978 and continued it in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 in 1979. Robert Lindsay, who plays Benedict, also played Fabian in Twelfth Night in 1980, Captain Dumaine in All's Well That Ends Well, and Lysander in A Midsummer Night's Dream, both in 1981, and Iachimo and Cymbeline in 1982. Vernon Dobchev, who plays Don John, also plays Agamemnon in the 1981 BBC version of Troilus and Cressida. Gordon Kaye, who plays the First Watch, also plays the Duke of Austria in the 1984 version of The Life and Death of King John. Graham Crowden, who plays the Friar, also played Cassius Lucius in the 1982 version of Cymbeline. And Robert Gwilym, who plays Conrad, is the brother of actor Michael Gwilym, who plays Aufidius in Coriolanus, the title role in Pericles, both in 1984, and Barone in the 1985 version of Love's Labour's Lost. I also encourage you to watch the 1983 Kenneth Branagh version of Much Ado About Nothing, which features an all-star cast including Denzel Washington as Don Pedro, Keanu Reeves as Don John, Kenneth Branagh as Benedict, Emma Thompson as Beatrice, Kate Beckinsale as Hero, and Michael Keaton, who steals the show as the hysterical Constable Dogberry. And now get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is entitled, "What's in a Name? Name. Name." Now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called, "What's in a Name? Name. Name." I want you to name which character repeats these names 3 times in a row and in which plays. Number 1, "Oh, Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe." Number 2, "Good Hubert, Hubert, Hubert." And number 3, "Davy, Davy, Davy." When we get back, I'll give you the answers and we'll look at some relevant lessons in Much Ado About Nothing. All right, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called What's in a Name? Name. Name. I need you to name which character repeats these names 3 times in a row and in which play. Number 1, "Oh, Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe." That, of course, is Silvius in As You Like It. Number 2, "Good Hubert, Hubert, Hubert." That is King John in The Life and Death of King John. And number 3, "Davy, Davy, Davy." That is Country Justice Robert Shallow in Henry IV, Part 2. Now let's finish up with some relevant lessons from Much Ado About Nothing. First, make sure you understand people's motives when they give you advice or gossip about others. The best way to trust anyone is to measure their congruency. In other words, do their words match their actions? Next, remember that, as Tony Robbins said, no matter how thin you slice it, there's always 2 sides to every story. Before you jump to conclusions, get the facts and take the time to listen not only to the words, but the emotions and motivations behind them. And third, remember that no one ever gets too good at communicating. This is especially true in romantic relationships. If you want your relationships to thrive, be open to sharing the truth, speaking from your heart, and allowing the other person to be heard. As Dr. Joyce Brothers once said, listening, not imitation, is the sincerest form of flattery. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo on Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a usurping king learns that it's easier to get the throne than it is to keep it, especially when he's busy worrying about whether or not his eldest son is worthy of succession.